All right, so to summarize, we've got two categories we've done so far. The supine, reactive player, the guy we keep at long range that has little risk. We've got the seated player, the guy that we keep at sort of mid-range, and that guy has a higher level of risk, but I wouldn't categorize it as a risky style. It's obviously still a very safe type of bottom to play. And then now we're going to get to the third category, and this category can blend between those two positions, between supine and seated, depending on how they ended up in that situation. And I categorize this as the reluctant bottom, the guy that doesn't want to be on bottom anymore. And I'm lumping two types of this person together, right? Because obviously we've got wrestlers and we've got MMA fighters. And I mean, typically an MMA fighter does not want to be on bottom in any situation, right? If they're on bottom, they lose the fight, right? It's obviously, it sounds like a fairy tale from a distant time where you could pull guard an MMA fight and find the submission. Those days are long gone, right? And wrestlers transitioning to jiu-jitsu don't want to be on bottom because it's ingrained in them that it's not a part of their sport, you know what I mean? And they're going to be more comfortable being on top. And obviously, if it's a takedown battle, takedown wrestler versus jiu-jitsu guy, wrestler's going to end up on top. And again, I lump this in as well. But obviously, if I'm basically trying to pass Tyler aggressively, I'm applying that pressure where we're pressuring him and Tyler can't get any attacks off. It's going to come a point in time where he goes, well, obviously I can concede the pass and potentially find an opportunity to rest there, or I can try to get back up. And obviously if Tyler gets back up, and this can happen, two jiu-jitsu guys against each other, jiu-jitsu guys obviously have a weaker level of takedown ability. So it does make sense that Tyler against another jiu-jitsu guy could think, I'm having no luck on bottom. He's pressuring me, he's fatiguing me, he seems fresh. I'll stand back up. And maybe he takes me down again, maybe he doesn't. Again, maybe he takes me down again, and I end up in a closer range guard where I can work from, something like close guard. So it does make sense that when a jiu-jitsu guy gets tired, they think, let me get the fuck up. Derek Lewis style, just get up. Those two types of person on bottom that doesn't want to be there, and again, I lump MMA wrestler in together, and also the jiu-jitsu guy, they have similar and dissimilar ways of getting up. Generally speaking, a jiu-jitsu guy will be risk averse. So when we approach a jiu-jitsu guy's guard, if Tyler's supine, and I've been working like crazy here, and he's getting tired, generally speaking, the jiu-jitsu guy to get up, first he will return to seated, and then he'll be looking to take this traditional get up here with a frame and stand back up. But obviously MMA fighter, wrestler type still, if we ended up in this sort of zone, they would still probably do the same thing, right? But again, typically speaking, MMA wrestler types, we wouldn't have ever let them have this level of distance between us. So generally speaking, MMA fighter or wrestler type, we know we need to hold them down immediately, so we might be controlling the legs or something, and they would look to get up in different ways, right? If we get outside here, they might be happy to turn into a 4-point. To risk giving up the back to escape, they might even take an ugly shot from the outside here and risk getting into a front head because he can use it to go from single leg to underhook and start to climb up, right? So we have to be able to address who's on bottom and how we keep them there, right? But again, the methodology behind the instructional series, right, is that we can turn a supine player into a seated player and a seated player ultimately into a guy that wants to stand up. And again, the opportunity lies in the transition spots. I believe the weakest part of a supine player's game is as he sits up. And I believe one of the most vulnerable positions for the seated player is as he stands up. So in those gaps in those positions, we find opportunity. I'm going to try to demonstrate that here today. But again, I don't teach jiu-jitsu generally. You know what I mean? It'd be good to have a one-size-fits-all approach to jiu-jitsu, but we have to try to recognize what type of person we're up against, right? And again, a jiu-jitsu guy that doesn't want to be on the ground is going to get up in a much safer way than a MMA fighter or a wrestler. And because they're going to get up in a much safer way, we can sort of narrow down how they get up. A jiu-jitsu guy is going to be much less likely to risk giving up the back to get up, or risk taking an ugly shot to get up. Again, they're going to try to highest. But you're not going to go into a roll and not know who this person is, right? So we can approach each individual based on who they are and make assumptions about their game. Again, when you face an MMA fighter or wrestler and you have a scramble and you end up on top, there's going to be overarching concepts that help us keep them down. And we also make predictions about what they're going to do to get up. We all know that type of person, right? Because again, MMA fighter wrestler, it's ingrained in them not to be on bottom. So they have a built-in level of panic and stress at being on bottom. And again, what do people do when they're stressed or panicked? They generally use a bit more athleticism to try and get up, and they take more risks. So what we're going to demonstrate, and again, we bring back to range and risk, and that is at this last stage of this instructional, our range has gone from distant to mid-level, and now if someone tries to get up, we've got to be a short range. We're going to be as close as possible. We're going to talk about a concept called head over head, and that's how we keep people down. But again, we bring it back to risk. Someone that doesn't want to be on bottom is generally happy to take a few more risks to get up. So their risk level is much greater because we're going to be much closer to a great position or a submission. And we also have to cover in this section basically how some of the positions we end up in against an MMA fighter or wrestler will be slightly different. They're going to be much more likely if they turn to turtle and we throw hooks in to 4-point. So we have to change how we approach that. Whereas a jiu-jitsu guy, generally speaking, we take hooks from a turtle position, they're much more likely to turn to a hip, try and get out, almost EBI overtime style, because they don't have to worry about strikes. But again, we look at instructionals like this because we train with all different types of individuals. We can't just prepare for jiu-jitsu guys because we also train with the MMA fighters and wrestlers. And a big problem even high-level jiu-jitsu guys have is they recognize that they never learned the correct way to approach those type of grapplers. Because every day in the gym, they train with other jiu-jitsu people and they have that unspoken rules of the sport in their head, and then they face a MMA guy or a wrestler and they've realized, oh shit, I can sweep him, but I can't keep him down. Or I can sweep him and get to a semi-good position, but they give these unorthodox responses that I just am not used to dealing with. So we're going to explain that as we go, but we're going to start with the first principle, which will be a head over head principle. So we're going to emphasize how important that short range distance is to keep someone down. And again, this will work for MMA fighters trying to heist up. This will work for a jiu-jitsu guy that's had enough. And we want to close that distance as quickly as possible. Best way to think about it is head over head. My head is above Tyler's head. He's going to really have to give up maybe his back, but it's going to create a very sense of urgency in Tyler, a sense of panic again. And again, when they're in that sense of panic stage, they make bad decisions. So even though it's not a good idea for him to stand up at this point, he still might try. So I want you to do this because this is super simple, but just do it as a bit of a drill, it should be a bit of fun. But to demonstrate what I mean is, if Tyler's, he might be supine, he might be seated here, but for the sake of it, let's say I want him on his back and he tries to get up and I'm at this range. Obviously, super simple, right? But if we change it now, forget about guards, right? Because most people aren't dynamic here. I think this is coming. Like Tyler's got to be able to make me think he wants something other that he actually is planning to do, right? Because if he's supine and we're at long range, obviously he's free to get up, right? But if we think he wants to get up and we close the range, now we're giving him that guard position, right? So there's a gray area in between, so we really have to be able to sense really what this guy wants to do. So if Tyler wants to get up and I apply head over head principle here, Tyler's trying to get up, we're gonna get his back every time. So I want you to do it as a bit of a drill. They start supine. Forget about anything. Forget about holding the legs. Just keep this as a real conceptual approach. And Tyler's going to try to get up. So we're at distance. We set him, try to get up. We rush him, go. He cannot get up without giving his back. And there's no technique there. That's literally just me rushing him. So again, a super simple game you can play with your training partners. But just forget about, don't even come here. We're going to get to things like holding the legs and stuff. We're just an exercise in a concept. Tyler's trying to get up. We're going to be able to take that back every time, right? So simple concept, head over head. That demonstrates how the range is different. When someone's supine and we're playing our long range passing style, when you sense that they're starting to think about getting up, they don't want to be there anymore, we rush them head over head. And in that position, they will have great difficulty in getting back to the feet. Let's look at how we can deal with that hand frame, right? Every time Tyler wants to get up, he takes a frame, right? And this frame is basically there to prevent that head over head pressure, because we know they're vulnerable getting up. But if they have this frame against us, obviously if Tyler has a frame, my head is behind that frame. Unless I got some super freakishly long neck, if he's framed against my shoulder, my head's relatively close to that shoulder. So that means as he gets up, I can't rush him, because as I hit that frame, he also uses my forward momentum to move back. So obviously if Tyler's supine, or if I'm basically head over head and he's seated and he tries to get up, he gives up the back. We've seen that. We've demonstrated that vulnerability. But what do we do if we didn't close the distance quick enough? And again, this will happen because we have to read their intentions of getting up. And again, sometimes we might be too slow to the party there and they get that frame in. If I'm in front of Tyler and he has this frame and I keep thinking head over head and he gets up, the frame is pushing him up. So it's an issue, right? Obviously, if prior to the frame coming in, I get here, now he's vulnerable if he tries to get up, right? So we have to figure out what can we do to beat this frame, right? The most simple one is to turn my shoulders, right? He needs a platform to push off. So if I drive into the shoulder he's framing against, this helps him get up. So one way we could beat this frame is make this shoulder light. So as Tyler tries to get up, we can turn the corner. So he feels a solid frame, and I immediately use it to turn. Super simple, right? This is also the same concept as in, if I'm in side control on Tyler, and you get those guys that are really good at using your forward pressure to get up, right? If I stay square and heavy, I'm helping Tyler hip escape here and make distance. It's the exact same principle that if he frames and I loosen that side of my body, he can't get up, right? So if he capitalizes on my cross-face pressure, even just this one hand, he uses that to get up. If that side of my body is light and he goes to get up, we're able to pass. So I want you to think about what, so we're able to keep the position. Think about it the same way. So if you have a hard shoulder here, and I push in, super easy to get up. If we meet the resistance and we immediately relax that side, we're able to address that frame. He wants a platform to push off. So let's look at another way we can beat that arm as well, right? Let's say we don't feel too good about that one, we want another option. When Tyler frames here, we can actually start hitting an arm drag motion here. So I'm basically gonna strike the hand to hit it down, pull the armpit. So as he starts to get up, he still gives us that back position, right? So although he may be better in that position, may clear the grips, we've still put him in a position where he has to exert himself here. Obviously it would be different if Tyler gets up and I think I'm a WWE guy trying to slam him from here. I'm gonna fatigue myself. But if when he gets up, if I'm keeping pressure into him here, he's now carrying my weight in a unique position. And chances are, if he's trying to get up so urgently, he's already tired. If that's a jiu-jitsu guy and he ends up in that position, chances are he's getting up because he's tired, his arms, his legs are already tired. We're probably going to be able to break him down from there, secure the back or the pass. So it fits into the theme. If we don't break him down from there, he's had to carry our weight, potentially walk his hands back and posture up. But again, another good option, right, is he frames, we're coming in, he starts to get up, we hit that drag, and we circle to the back, securing the rear body lock. Two really high percentage options. We can also throw in a bit of a fun one too, right? So we could use the drag to start setting up a bit of a dust here and secure the top of the head. So something a bit fancy here, but we're still going for the arm drag, but instead of resting here, I'm coming around the back of the head, using my elbow to prevent him posturing. Prior to establishing the grip, if I go for the grip and he postures, I'll never break that back down. So what I do is I capture the head, I break him down, then I secure the grip, and we can start thinking about addressing submissions from here. Sorry, finishing the submission from here. But again, just a bit of fighting on something else. We can catch that grip, keep the posture broken, and start attacking the dust from this position. Another way we can sort of ensure that even a jiu-jitsu guy doesn't hip heist easily from this position, right, is if Tyler's not trying to get up and I circle, he can easily follow me from here. I cannot get outside the legs very easily, right? We would find it easier to get outside the leg from a supine position. So if Tyler's seated up and I start to feel he wants to get up, even before he's reaching, I can start to circle. We can get outside the legs if our opponent's intentions are to hip heist up from here. And obviously Tyler from here, if he were to start getting up, terrible idea. Chances are he returns to supine to get his legs back. Now we've got him back to square one. So if you're thinking about this seated position, maybe we're hand fighting here, but we feel him wanting to frame, right? Just get outside the legs and they're gonna really have to rethink that position. So we had basically some key ways to beat it. They get the frame, it doesn't mean we've lost this battle, right? Head over head prevents the framing for the hip heist. If they do get the frame, we can still counter. We can use that light shoulder movement to take away their post. We can hit a drag. We can hit a drag to the dust, and also knowing that they want to get up, we can cover the hand, stay outside the legs. Because again, if they're trying to get up, they're not thinking mobility. They're not using that seated position to its greatest strength. All right, we're going to talk about how we can control the legs. This is one of those techniques I have to explain it because it's going to be a core part of what you do, but it's so obvious in retrospect. We're also going to talk about how we could use that leg grip to shelf it, yeah. Again, a lot of the time we have that unspoken rule in jiu-jitsu where I sweep a guy, the guy accepts the sweep, starts playing guard. And then again, that curveball gets thrown in where you face MMA fighters or wrestlers and you sweep them and they get up and you're like, hey, fuck you, you're not playing by the rules, right? And obviously, the most simple way to address that is if I sweep Tyler, put him on his back here, I want to control the feet. Tyler tries to get up here, I just keep lifting his feet, right? It's going to come a point where he accepts that he's a bottom for life and he just, we control his feet for long enough, he'll stay there, right? Can even work with 1 foot too. As long as Tyler's trying to get up, I keep lifting that ankle and following forward pressure here. Yeah, super simple. You guys can practice it. Just start back here and say to your training partner, try to get up. Every time you feel resistance, lift their heels above their knees, right? Back here, Tyler's probably gonna be at a butt scoot away from me. Just start to sit up, right? So we wanna keep his heels above his knees. Tyler's trying to get up. Again, practice it with one leg as well. As long as we keep the heel above the knee, that should be basically a good measure for you there. Another one is say we've swept him here, we've ended up controlling both legs. Obviously here would be good. We're still controlling both legs. Tyler tries to get out. We're gonna consolidate that sweep. Say we lose one leg, we wanna create a shelf around this leg, right? So I wanna close the distance with my armpit and have my leg up. So now Charlie's trying to wiggle out. He cannot easily withdraw that leg, and if he overcommits, exposes the back. But a leg shelf is just going to be placing their leg on top of your hip, collapsing your armpit and chest over the leg, and now do a bit of experiment with your training partner, get him to try to get up. So Tyler's trying to get up. And you can see they have to expose something to get up. There's no safe way out of it. So again, this is super simple ideas. But if we can control the leg, if we can build that as a habit against all opponents, you're going to find that when you do sweep guys that don't want to be there, it's not going to catch you by surprise because you have this built-in habit of anticipating them fighting the sweep to the bitter end. So we're going to talk about how basically if you take a shitty shot off your butt, if they take a shitty shot off their butt and you sprawl your atypical sprawl for wrestling, they can use that angle to help themselves get up, right? They can take their shot, and as your hips sprawl away from them, they can upgrade to an underhook, obviously risking front head, but again, they're going to have to take a big risk to get up at this point, right? So as they use the risk of front head, they potentially climb back to the feet, or they're happy to be in a 4-point front headlock where they feel a bit more comfortable. And again, guys that do that are more comfortable in those positions, right? MMA fighters, wrestlers spend a lot more time dealing with that than they do trying to get up off their back here. So it's an area where they have potentially a greater advantage than your typical jiu-jitsu guy. So I changed the angle on my sprawl here, and I'm going to hit them with the hips front on, hoping that as they're trying to get up, instead of me sprawling away from them where they can upgrade grips, they're getting rushed shoulders behind hips. So I'm not sure if this is effective or it just makes them feel a bit sexually uncomfortable with the motion of my hips here. But again, another thing to worry about is we don't want to necessarily do this if they are fatigued. Because what do people do when they're fatigued? They breathe through their mouth, right? So let's see what it looks like for Tyler. So just to give you perspective, we'll face this way, right? If Tyler takes an ugly shot here, right, and I start to sprawl my hips away, Tyler can use the underhook to start climbing up. Obviously, if he took a shot in a standing position and I sprawl, I do want to sprawl my hips back here, right? But if his intention isn't to take me down, it's to secure an underhook, he can use that sprawl to get the underhook and potentially get up or end up in a front head. So if I'm rushing someone, it could be MMA fighter, it could be wrestler, it could be jiu-jitsu guy, and they take a shot here, I actually want to hit my hips forward, right? To keep them down. So again, just compare, we'll do this very slow, right? Tyler's on his butt here. If he takes a shot and I start sprawling backwards, at this point I can switch to an underhook. So come back. If Tyler switches to an underhook the second he feels the sprawl. So come back to that. So if I start sprawling back and he uses that underhook to start getting up, it's very, very effective, very frustrating. Because again, he's not shooting to get on top per se, he's shooting to get back to his feet. So if my hips come away from him towards his head, the underhook helps him get up. But if we do it real slow again, if I feel this shot and I keep my hips forward, it's very tough for Tyler to get up, right? So when we sense that pressure, we're hitting him with the hips. We're not sprawling away from him here. So we'll do it one more time. So we're hitting with the hips. As Tyler gets up, you want to rush. Again, head over head principle, but leading with the hips. And one more time, just so you can see what I mean. If he's on his butt and he takes a shot, and I sprawl as if it's a takedown and he upgrades, you can see how he can get that underhook here. So one more time. Exact same position, but I come forward. Very, very exhausting. It's a different sprawl. And again, it's something that's unorthodox because you're having to shoot out of position and the shot's intentions isn't to take you down. All right, so when we pass someone's guard, when we get to the outside position against a jiu-jitsu guy, I would always recommend facing the legs. We were talking about the hip pocket, facing the hip pocket, because if we cut in on a Toreando, go to something like knee right, and I'll demonstrate that soon. We can be put in a heel hook, right? They can invert to the legs. Very big vulnerability of passing and staying either facing the hip line or facing sort of the upper bodies. We can get heel hooks because they can invert underneath us. Again, something we don't have to worry about in the gi. Obviously, heel hooks aren't legal, but also we can control the ability to invert a bit easier with the collar grips. But when we're facing an MMA fighter or a wrestler, we can make different assumptions, right? People have particular skill sets. It's very difficult for them to be very well-rounded. Obviously, if we face someone that's an incredible wrestler, incredible guard player, incredible passer, incredible at submissions, obviously we're just going to probably lose, right? But very rarely is someone so well-rounded in certain areas. Again, we make predictions about their next movement based on who they are and what they've done to us in the past or what we've seen them do. So against a wrestler or a MMA fighter, if we hit an outside style pass, we can cruise straight into knee right here because we want to stay on top of them because we know that they're either going to turn into us or turn away and concede turtle. Different responses to what a jiu-jitsu guy would do. So knowing that they have different responses, we make different movements accordingly, right? So if Tyler's head's facing the camera here, let's say it's an MMA fighter, I quickly get outside the legs, I come into a knee right position here. This is much safer against an MMA fighter than a jiu-jitsu guy because if I did this against a jiu-jitsu guy and I face that shoulder line, Tyler can invert to attack the legs, right? So obviously if I get outside position against an MMA fighter, against a jiu-jitsu guy, I would be trying to face down the leg line here, looking towards their legs. But again, if we did that against an MMA fighter, maybe they have a better ability to start turning in and shooting or just scrambling away, taking bigger risks. So against an MMA guy, against a wrestler, the first assumption we can often make is that when we come on top, they might start turning into us, looking to secure a single leg here, right? This is a very counterable position here, right? So let's go back. As we come in, if I anticipate this response, as Tyler turns in, I hold his hip. So if you can see my right hand stays in place as long as possible because that slows his ability to turn in. It's not going to prevent it, but it slows it. What we can do is release it at the last second, and we're going to step over the head and drag elbow to the floor and switch hips to generate back exposure here. And again, we could even think about taking Khabib style wrist rides to get him to return or progress straight to the back touch. But again, we generated that back exposure out of an assumed response here. MMA guys, I'm not going to be staying up here, maybe unless I had an ability to shoulder pin here before I establish position. But generally speaking, we can take these riskier movements against guys that we know are going to turn in or turn away. It's going to become evident very, very clearly which direction they turn. And both movements, I'm going to have to slow their movement by controlling the hips. So again, Tyler turns into me. He's going for a single leg here. So I'm slowing him down. I step over the head. I throw my elbow to the floor into the pocket. I kick that leg over. If their arm's behind and they've let him go, we can catch and pin them here. If they leave their arm in position, then we can start looking to take seat belts, gift wraps, get our knee inside, control the top hook, and place in a bottom hook, right? So something I wouldn't recommend against your average jiu-jitsu guy because I think that knee right position is very difficult in our no-gi jiu-jitsu. But let's look at it from a different angle. We come in, I'm holding his hip, and we can clear that and generate back exposure here, right? So that would be a response. That would be a great response against someone that you know is going to turn in. But obviously, given that we understand that someone that doesn't want to be on bottom is more likely to take risks, they may not just turn in, but they may just turn away. A lot of MMA fighters especially have excellent turtle defense. Excellent turtle defense, have excellent 4-point opportunities from that position. So they're much more likely to give up their back. And again, they're much more likely to give up their back because they know if they stay flat on their back, they can give up the rounds. An MMA fighter in a 5-minute round is quite happy to just stay on top. The guy on bottom doesn't want to take any risks. They'll stay on top. They'll accept that they're going to win that round. Play some ground and pound. Not too often will the top guy take a big risk because you see it can cost them that top position. They want to keep on top. So in that sense, if the guy on bottom in an MMA context knows he's going to lose the round, if he stays where he is, he takes a bigger risk. Obviously, when strikes are involved, guys are happy to take a bigger risk. I'm explaining in an MMA context because some guys we roll with, some guys we compete against have these responses. And if those responses are unusual to us, it can cost us. We can make mistakes trying to approach them with a jiu-jitsu mindset rather than understand where they're coming from. So again, MMA fighters are going to take risks to get up. One of those risks is they'll risk giving their back because they're so good at shaking you off the top, or they're so good at preventing hooks and scrambling out from those positions. Also, they know jiu-jitsu guys have poor mat returns. So if they give up the back and get up, they're pretty confident they're going to stay up here, right? So they can exploit our common responses like we can exploit theirs, but we have to understand what they will be. Again, we saw one of them, and that was to turn in for a single leg. Another one is, again, Tyler just gives up the back and turns away. So I want to hold his hip, first of all. If he turned in, we controlled the far hip. If he turns away, I'm controlling the near side hip. Why do I want to control this? Because if I didn't and I chase Tyler and he explodes out, we might lose. He might be much quicker than us. Generally speaking, more money in MMA. So those guys, that draws in the better athletes, more explosive athletes. So obviously, generally speaking, jiu-jitsu guy against MMA fighter, much more explosive than us. So anticipate big, strong, explosive movements. So when we come to this knee right position, we need to slow their ability to turn away, giving us time to take advantage of this back control. I'm going to slide my knee in as Tyler comes up. And that's going to become our first hook here, right? If we have good control over the hip here and Tyler's vulnerable, I can start to pull him back down. But I want you to emphasize sticking like glue to his back here, slowing his ability to come up. I lead with my knee. When my knee's in position, I lead with my foot. So again, we come to this knee right position. Tyler starts to turn away, lead with the knee. The foot follows. And we either stick to him like glue here, or if they had a vulnerable base, if we come back a couple steps, sometimes even we get that hook and we can pull him back down here. But either way, if he does come up, I want to stay on top of him here and stay square. So we change our angle here. One of Tyler's goals from here, if he comes from an MMA background, is to stand up here and lift his hips high. He wants to shake us off the top here. Good twerk. That's how he makes his money, actually. So maybe we'll just get him to do that for the rest. So when we get this near hook in, we need to prevent him standing up. A great way to do that is to flare this back leg. Tyler tries to stand up now. Very, very difficult here. Again, this isn't a response we'd necessarily do to a jiu-jitsu guy because they're going to give us a different response. Against a jiu-jitsu guy, I might try to rush through and take a body triangle. But if I try to do that too quickly against a guy with a 4-point response, we're going straight over the top. So I take this far inside hook here. And I want you to test it out. Obviously, get your training partners try and stand up. Very difficult. So if we face the other direction, so that's what we're doing with our lower half. What are we doing with the upper body here? I'm not going to reach straight through for the power half. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my elbow to collapse his head first. So if Tyler's really explosive here, he's fatiguing his neck. So we don't reach from seatbelt to here. We first collapse the head, then we connect the hand. Then I pull his head underneath his shoulder here, aiming to get that mohawk onto the ground, hoping that we lose a few hairs here. And now we can start to look to establish control. So I'm using the shoulder to get under the neck. I'm extending my top leg so that I can throw a body triangle hook in and we can safely take the back. Again, taking the back of a guy with this style response is always going to be different to a jiu-jitsu guy. The standard responses we know. So we've come into a knee right here. The MMA guy's turning away. We're controlling that hip. You can see Tyler tries to get up. It's going to slow him down. I slide my knee in, and then I lead with the foot. Either we catch it so early he gets stuck on the hip, but chances are if he's explosive enough, he pulls us up. Immediately, we flare that foot here. We flaring that out. If we keep the ankle wide, he won't be able to stand up. I place my elbow on the back of his head and I push it down. So even if I don't have the power half connected, Tyler tries to lift his head, it's still quite heavy. Then we connect our hands, then we put the roll. I immediately cup the shoulder, lift, connect, extend, and we throw that through for the body traction. So again, I know I talk a lot about MMA responses and wrestling responses in my instructionals, but again, there's nothing more embarrassing, right, than a pure jiu-jitsu guy that cannot hold down an MMA fighter. Those guys spend a third of their time training pure jiu-jitsu, arguably even less because it's so hard to be effective at pure jiu-jitsu and MMA. So we should know how to hold that guy down. If we get a sweep, we keep him down. If he does these unorthodox things that are sort of not very well liked in a jiu-jitsu setting, we should know how to beat him. Not every guy we face against will be the latest technical jiu-jitsu meta playing seated wrestling and leg locks. Sometimes we're going to be dealing with guys like this that are hard to control. And again, if we can control these guys and let them utilize that explosive energy that'll get them nowhere if we control them correctly, they'll be fatigued and we'll be able to break them down. But again, I firmly believe that we should be able to out-grapple MMA guys. And again, their responses are unusual and we need to know how to deal with it. Let's talk about how we can control the turtle position against guys that obviously want to stand up, right? So again, we talk about atypical jiu-jitsu response. Tyler's in turtle. He's keeping everything tight. He's preventing hooks. That's his main priority. And he obviously wants to avoid being scored on from here. So when we expect that, and then we put a guy in turtle whose primary concern is to get up and scramble, quite often we're like confused. We're like, hey, this is again breaking that unspoken rule. We're trying to keep him in turtle. So again, jiu-jitsu guys, the traditional response would be to always go seatbelt and then basically dive in hooks. But if you try that approach against a wrestler or against an MMA guy, he's got a 4-point circle. Even if you do get your hooks, chances are if you're 4 points, he's going to shake you over the top, right? So we can't have that as our primary concern. A strong recommendation would be if Tyler's in turtle, I'm always staying behind the arm set. But again, even with this idea in mind and not switching to seatbelt, which we traditionally do, it can be still pretty tough to control this position against explosive athletic guys. So in my opinion, I would recommend if we're putting a guy here that's hard to control, priority one is a spiral ride combined with a claw. And we're going to use that to place a ton of weight on the upper body. So if my positioning is incorrect here, Tyler can get up, he can explode up. He's gonna have to burn some energy, right? But if he's gonna get up from here, we wanna make sure that he's had to carry our entire body weight the entire time. And again, say we pass a guy's guard, he concedes the turtle because he's just wants to get back to his feet. We've either fatigued him or it's a guy that never wants to be on bottom, never wants to play bottom position. And his primary concern is getting up. We need to know how to keep him here because against people that aren't jiu-jitsu guys, it can be tough to control guys from here. So we're going to combine two things. The first thing is a spiral ride grip. So I'm placing my fist inside Tyler's hip pocket here. And I'm stretching and straightening and rotating my thumb towards his arsehole. But I'm not going to penetrate the arsehole. We're just stretching our hand in this direction here. And you can see that's already putting weight forward onto Tyler's upper body. And we want to keep this weight heading in this direction. And then what we're going to do with our other hand is we're going to create a spiral ride grip. So I'm going to create a claw grip here. So I'm reaching deep around the neck. So if Tyler lifts his hand out of the way, we're going to reach. I'm going to hide my thumb under my hand here just to create a bit of a thicker pocket here. And we're going to grip the back of the neck and I'm pulling everything forward. So if I control with just the body lock here, Tyler 4 points, pretty easy, right? If I control with a seatbelt, even if I keep heavy, 4 points, pretty easy again. And now compare that to spiral ride with the thumb hidden, leaning body weight forwards. This is the exact response we want from them, right? We want them to have to exert a lot of energy because, again, we're cooking this guy. He's on bottom, doesn't want to be on bottom. We're punishing for being on bottom. So when we want to control this position, obviously, I want to make it difficult at both ends. I don't want it easy to Tyler to just come to his hands. I don't want that to be easy. I don't want it to be easy for him to climb up and lift his hips high. I want to eliminate both those things. In your traditional jiu-jitsu style response, it's kind of difficult to keep him from getting up. But again, we didn't have to worry about that in certain competitions because risk versus reward. Tyler's goal in a jiu-jitsu setting was just prevent hooks. So he has this different style of posture, different style of game. His goal is to basically catch me rushing the hooks and end up back to his backs in some way in a safe guard position while accepting bottom. But against the guy that doesn't want to stand, a guy that doesn't want to do that, he wants to get up, he just finds a way to explode up from here, right? We need to prevent that. So if we use jiu-jitsu response against this, it'll be a failure. But again, if we use this response against a jiu-jitsu guy, still going to work very well because they're not going to be able to get back to guard. Obviously, we're going to have to then transfer our grips to be able to take the back. But in terms of pure control, spiral ride, so that thumb rotating in, sending weight down towards the upper body, stretching the legs, making it difficult for him to get up. We're taking that thumb inside, claw grip here. So I pull his head, place my chest on the back of his scapula here, and we're controlling with that spiral ride grip. So Tyler's trying to get up. Even if he gets to his hands, just rush him forward again. He's only going to have a few explosions out of it, right? And that's going to be our way to control the turtle position. Again, that's one of the best things that someone can give us in jiu-jitsu. If I'm rolling with Tyler and he gives up the turtle, I think to myself, fuck yeah, he's close to the end. I'm going to take his back soon, right? So there's nothing more frustrating than going against the guy that's strangely good and doing strangely unusual responses from there. And not only do I not get the back, I might get shaken off and end up on bottom, or he stands up and now I have to wrestle with a guy that's a better wrestler than me. If we put someone there, we should be able to keep him there until ultimately we can progress the position and finish the roll or the match. So a lot of the time, those MMA wrestler types, those guys that don't want to be on bottom, they're quite happy, again, to make concessions. We've seen how they were quite happy to make a concession, take a big risk in terms of exposing the back. They will also take risks in exposing front headlocks. Because again, I can't emphasize this enough. MMA wrestler types, with especially wrestlers with a bit of experience dealing with them, they have much better guillotine defense than us jiu-jitsu guys. We try to keep our head out of danger at all times. Those MMA wrestler types accept that they will be in the danger zone a lot and develop good defense in that area. So obviously if they have good defense in that area, they're happy to accept a risk that they're going to be put in there from time to time, right? If we do put those guys in that position, we have to have some sort of front head sort of methodology, right? And I've explained this in previous instructionals, so I'll touch on it, but I'll also offer a new attack as well, right? So obviously, jiu-jitsu guys, if they're in a front head, they're going to be on their elbows here. They're on their elbows, so their hands are free to hand fight, right? Very, very obvious, right? Wrestler MMA types have to be on their hands, having sort of more faith in their guillotine defense than necessarily they should, right? Because the high wrist, entirely different beast to deal with, right? Your standard arm in, your standard high elbow, they're quite comfortable using rotation to clear a grip like that. Whereas a high wrist rotation is not going to go as far. It's also going to come on much, much quicker, right? So if we want a wrestler, MMA type, to return to his elbows, we threaten that high wrist style submission. So we go from shallow chin strap and we cut the angle to turn down the shoulder line. I do a little pivoting motion to help me turn. And we use this chin strap hand to get depth, right? So I don't want to be here, because obviously it's, even if I was controlling this arm, it's hard for me to get that finish there. I want to get depth and keep the head trapped under my armpit. So we hollow out and round our shoulders so we could get extra depth. Whereas if we're broad, I have no depth at all. So we hollow out. What I do with my thumb is I turn it back towards them here. So I'm rotating my thumb this direction here. We don't just go up and down. So as I go for it, we do all those things in conjunction, and we turn that thumb, and the head stays trapped under that armpit there. So we rotate that thumb and cut the angle. I maintain control over this armpit, because if we're deep, Tyler can elbow pass quite easily and clear it, potentially reverse the position, right? Again, some of those types of grapplers will do, because again, they're experienced in this position. So I control the armpit here. Tyler tries to do it. Now he can no longer do it. What does he want to do? He wants to hand fight. How does he hand fight? He drops to his elbows. And now he can hand fight. We take that opportunity, obviously, to either finish or transfer chest to back. Now it's harder for Tyler to get up because he's carrying all our weight, and we can start hitting these go behind positions. Again, when we hit this go behind, I won't touch Tyler in precisely that way, but we want something back here to keep weight forward. So initially, my chest is keeping weight forward. But as I rotate, that weight's going to displace. It'll be in a different position. But I want to keep him heavy here so he can't get up to his hands. So I use a hand, preferably a thumb, in that butthole to keep weight forward. Tyler's trying to get onto his hands here. He's got weight making it difficult. If I just turn, he's going to get up. So we have to, when we're attacking front head, we stay shallow, sort of shoulder to shoulder until it's time to go when he returns to his elbows. If anyone's ever on their elbows here, don't be shoulder to shoulder, be chest to back. We make the chest to back pass off, right? Obviously, we're attacking the high wrist to get him back here. He's here, we get that chest to back connection. We take 2 fingers, we stick it back here, and I use this to keep weight forward. Chest keeps him on his elbows. When the chest moves, now our hands around his butthole keeps him weight forward here, right? We can also attack other things out of this position. So if we switch angles here, we can make some assumptions too, right? Like, I may push Tyler's butt forward if you stay. I may push Tyler's butt forward, but he might try. You see how he's left space here, right? We're going to take advantage of this hook. Just like we did previous, when we flared that leg, it was difficult for him to get all the way up. There are many different ways to do that, right? This will be another one. Half guard, your basic sort of dogfight entry position is flaring that to misguide their body to avoid certain attacks, right? So when we make that chest to back connection here, I can choose to step over this leg with my Achilles. So what I'm doing with my hands, I'm keeping them in a threatening zone. Whenever my hands are around here, we have the opportunity for anacondas, darces, we could go back to guillotines, potentially crazy shit, Japanese neckties, Peruvian neckties. But we get that chest to back connection, and I use my heel to start pulling his foot towards me here. And then I sink my shoulder deep, and I keep my hands connected here. Tyler's trying to move. You can see now we're really controlling him here. We're making him panic. If we cut the angle a little bit. Once we've hooked this leg, we whirl chest to back. I bring my shoulder in. When my left arm comes in, we're closer to submission opportunities here, right? So you whirl chest to back. We were shallow with the left shoulder. The left shoulder can come in and we can attack this front head position, right? But I want to emphasize that we want to keep Tyler's hip away from his leg, away from his knee here. So if Tyler turns this way slightly, I hook his ankle here to activate that pivot, but to really make him feel that, I need pressure into the hip here. And that's giving him that painful external rotation, right? So we had our chest to back connection. I don't want to stay shallow here. Shallow is still good here. Tyler still has a lot of trouble moving. You can see I've got a lot of weight on the back of his head. But if I want to submit him, I want to drag my shoulder in. And even if we don't submit him from here, I'm now stressing his body, putting pressure on him, and we can start thinking about attacks. So Tyler, if he tries to come up to his hands here, it's an easy pass off to secure the DAS, right? Because if he's on his elbows, generally speaking, there's space between his elbow and his ear. When he comes up on his hands, it's easier for me to close this distance. It's easier for me to drag this in. So when he comes back down and we're shoulder in here, he starts to come up, it's very easy to lock it up. And I wouldn't finish from here. I would drive off my back leg and start to return him to a hip here. And this is a great position for us to attack DASs. Obviously, it's a great submission position, but you can see even if submission wasn't the goal here, he's given up the front headlock. We've trapped him in such a way that he cannot get up easily, and then we've collapsed him back to a hip. So a great little cycle of attacks. Again, we had our first one. We used the high wrist to return him to elbows. Great, that's tried, that's true. A return to the elbows, we can hit a go behind out of that. But we want to keep mixing this up. We want lots of unique things. And again, another way we can do that is this sort of attack motion to set up a DAS, right? So we get that chest to back connection here. I keep my hands tight. I'm keeping heavy on his back here. We're not here. There's no weight on him here. Yeah, he's easy to move, right? So we had our front head. We get that chest to back connection. I step and catch Achilles to Achilles. I pull it until my knee hits the floor. Then we drive our shoulder in. Tyler's trying to move here. Very, very difficult. We've rotated the spine and it's easy for us to control. So Tyler's trying to move. I'm driving my shoulder into him here and his ankle's left behind. That's bending his spine. That's putting the pressure on his hips here. Very difficult. Obviously, I could start to threaten the DAS, or I could keep the grips tight and start to drive him back to a hip here. And again, now we've put him in another position where we could threaten the DAS, but we've collapsed someone that's potentially athletic, explosive, and we've returned him to a hip. We've beaten the position that they think is going to be a great position to risk using to get up, and we've used that to return them to a hip with the opportunity for submission in there as well. You can throw that submission opportunity in there to keep them guessing what they'll do with their hands. But another great way to attack someone that's, again, willing to make those concessions in the pursuit of standing back up. Let's talk about 4-point, right? So obviously, when we're trying to approach the guard, or we're trying to approach a bottom player that doesn't want to be there, and they turtle, sometimes it's great. We keep them in turtle route. They cannot get up from there. But again, there's a couple of things they could do from turtle. They could lead with their head, run away, or they could lead with the hips. They could lead with the ass, get that high, and try to fight their way back to their feet from there. We'll create Granby opportunities, scrambling opportunities from there. We don't want them to 4-point. Sometimes it happens, right? And again, if we don't develop a methodology from that position, we're potentially going to lose it, right? I'm not going to guarantee that if someone 4 points on you, you'll be able to return them to the mat every time, right? But if we fail with any of these things, let's ensure that the other guy burnt a ton of energy in you failing. So even if you know you can't hold this guy down from 4-point easily, don't let him up easily. Keep your weight on him heavy. That applies from everywhere. If you know you're not going to get something on a guy, make him at least explode more than necessary. And ultimately, over time, if we can fatigue him, we increase our chances of success and winning, right? So we'll look at basically the 4-point position, the quad pod, and we're going to look at a simple way we can try to return their knees to the floor. Hopefully return their knees and elbows. Although I have shown it in other instructionals where we can jump 2 hooks from there, short hook, long hook, we need to use the right tool for the job, right? So if it's a competition, we need to score points to win. Yes, you can jump short hook, long hook, and score, right? But ultimately, you back yourself into a corner because either we get the hooks or we get shaken off the top. Or we get the hooks and get shaken off the top, right? Ultimately, neither of those two are great for us. A lot of MMA guys are very good at shaking off the top, right? And we're going to increase our likelihood of success if we can return them from 4-point to the knees to place in hook. And again, if we can return them from the knees and elbows to a hip, that chance of success goes up and our risk goes down. So jumping hooks on a 4-point opponent is a high risk move because even if you get it, sometimes you still get shaken off. And the purpose of your training should be to do the most high percentage technical efficient movements, not to think about it per se in a framework of points, right? Ultimately, we can only compete for a certain amount of time. We're not always just thinking in that direction. Again, I've demonstrated in this some of the best pinning positions, some of the best punishing bottom player positions aren't point scoring positions, right? So I'd always recommend have it in the back pocket, understand how to do it to not get shaken off the top if you dive hooks because you'll need it for competition purposes. But ultimately, if there's enough time left in the match, I'm always going to recommend return them to the mat, right? So a really simple way we can do that here is if Tyler's in the 4-point, again, we didn't necessarily want to have him here, right? But if we want to knock him down very easily and he's very stable here, one of the ways we can do that is to overstretch his legs. And we want to do it in a safe way because obviously if we develop a habit of I leave my leg inside, Tyler can potentially roll the leg here, right? So the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to place my knee inside. And I want to stretch Tyler's leg away from his other leg. Because we're applying heavy weight into it, this left foot is gripped on the ground. So if that left foot's gripped on the ground and we stretch this one, the legs stretch apart. And obviously, Tyler comes from a kung fu background, so he might be able to do the splits here. But generally speaking, as this leg stretches, that other knee's going to hit the mat, followed by this knee hitting the mat, right? Because he's not going to be able to keep his legs stretched too easily. We've got a body lock here. Again, we're always trying to stay behind the arms here. We could even think about using our spiral ride combined with a claw grip there. But sometimes we had the body lock and they got up, right? So let's use it from the framework of a body lock here. I'm heavy on Tyler here. I'm not weight off. Generally speaking, people unfamiliar with this position don't apply weight to the guy in the 4-point because they're nervous. You know what I mean? It's unfamiliar. We're thinking defensive. We're thinking backing out, even though we've got him in such a good position. So what I'm going to do from here is I've got my grips around the chest, close to the arms. I place my knee in the back here, and you see I'm sinking weight into Tyler's left leg. Most of my weight's guided to his left leg and his left arm. And I use my knee to pull Tyler across here. And you see we get a strong response. We ultimately got into a hip, but even if we got into 2 knees, perfect situation here to now take our spiral right claw grip. And now when Tyler tries to get back up, we're fatiguing him here, right? So very safe, very low risk way to return him to the mat. Tyler's 4-point. So we've got our grips. Again, I'm just taking any form of body lock grip. Just attach ourselves. Heavy towards them, but heavy slightly to the left. We want to stretch this leg. So if this leg's completely weighted into the ground, it's going to be harder to move. If we put weight in this leg, it's going to be easier to drag this knee. So we guide our weight in this direction. We're heavy on top, and we've got our knee here. Our knee's good here to monitor them too, because it's hard for Tyler to start running and circling away from me in the 4-point because we're tracking his knee. So I put all my weight, almost a hip-to-hip pressure, and then we drag that knee to the ground. We want to keep him here, so we hit the spiral right in the claw, and we run forward into him. Tyler's trying to get up. And that's exactly what quite often happens, right? Tyler's had a heart attack. If we come up here, generally speaking, when we've returned him to the mat, and Tyler tries to take his steps, that is the vulnerability to return him back right here. So again, super low risk way to attack the 4-point here. Again, I'm not saying don't jump hooks. In the purpose of competition, we have to do it. But really think about it like if you jump hooks and you can't hit a power half and get him down, you've got nothing. You've got nothing. You'll never choke a guy from a 4-point there. If he 4-points and stands up with your hooks in, sure, you'll choke him in a standing position, but that guy's probably an idiot. He should stay there because he's safe from rear nakeds. Your only chance for submission is a falling armbar, falling triangle, or obviously you get shaken off the top. So in that sense, there's not a lot of options. So we want to return him to the mat, keep our options broad, our risks low. We'll also throw in another fun one, mainly because I want to just do this to Tyler. But again, sometimes if we've applied a ton of weight here and we cannot get him down right, as Tyler comes up, I'm going to grab his shoulder on the far side and I'm going to kick this leg out. And we can knock him back to the mat and chase him down immediately, right? So again, it does work well because he thinks I cannot get him down here. Maybe his base is really good. So I sort of start to back up. He starts to walk his hands towards his feet. We grab this shoulder, I pull it back, and we can chase him down again, right? Obviously that has the added benefit of being quite embarrassing, right? Again, it's all fun and games to fuck with your training partners, fuck with your opponents. But if we do bother our training partners, we do piss them off a bit, it clouds their judgment, raises their stress levels, and again, likely makes them make bad decisions too. I do a lot of stupid shit in the gym, and one thing I notice is sometimes to my training partners, I lower them to my level. So they try and bullshit back to me, right? But in an angry, aggressive way, right? Tyler would be a good example. And if we can do anything to increase the stress levels in a safe way in a training environment, we're going to increase that overall fatigue level and be more successful in the long run. All right, so we've reached the end of the instructional, and I just want to give a brief framework. I mean, it's going to be much of the same stuff we discussed in the introduction, but we're trying to put all of this together, put it all in context. Why is it different to things other people have done? Obviously, there will be similarities too. But basically, again, I'm summarizing 3 types of bottom player, right? We've got the supine, reactive player, and we've discussed that we should approach that. We've got the seated, active and reactive player, and we've discussed how we should approach that guy. And then we've also got that person that doesn't want to get up. But I want you to understand that a supine player, if we approach and keep to the system we've discussed here today, we keep hammering it away, applying pressure at a safe distance, because we have that advantage to make them carry our weight while we obviously don't need to carry their weight. And if we approach that, we keep hammering that guy, they have one of 2 choices. Accept the pass. When you're tired, you can't really fight back, you can accept the pass. Or they have the idea that they don't want to be there anymore. They want to start to get back up. And in their return to attempting to get back up, as they go from supine to seated, therein lies great opportunities for passes, great potential to exploit. If they're sick of playing supine and they want to play seated, they want to play a different approach, something where they're more active, we've discussed how we can hand fight and forcibly return them to supine position. When we forcibly return them, they might decide to play supine again, or they might try to keep sitting up. Supine, we gas them by keeping the legs away from the body, and like we did with the weave, we can pull on the head. That's how we gas them. When we return them to supine and they sit up, we gas them every time they do a sit-up. That's fatiguing, right? And then if they're playing seat, they decide they don't want to get up anymore, we sense that we can rush them and we can potentially find opportunities to take the back. If they get the frame, we can drag, we can hit dashes, we can do many things as they do that. If we think out of a scramble, we've put a guy that doesn't want to be on bottom. Your atypical wrestler, your atypical MMA fighter, the guys that take big risks to get up. But against a jiu-jitsu guy, those risks aren't as great because, of course, we aren't as good at mat returning. We aren't as good at pinning these guys. So guys that we typically don't think of as effective grapplers find effectiveness by putting us in gray areas. We can change our approach a bit to attack and punish those guys as well. But broadly, I want you to just approach things differently. I want you to approach a supine player by keeping as safe as you can. That's the core of this instructional. How do we punish an ultra flexible, great leg lock, a great inverter? How do we approach that guard, right? Because that seems to be sort of the meta of the sport right now. How can we punish that guy for choosing to play the way he plays? We punish him by giving him nothing. We don't let him establish any guard. We don't let him establish any grips. And we whittle him away over time until, again, we either find the pass or we find them scrambling to try to get back to their feet. But I want you to approach this with an open mind and just give your training partners, your opponents, nothing. Again, we have seated guards. Seated guards have been popular for a while. There are ways to attack it: head high, hand fight. And again, don't not roll with the MMA fighters and wrestlers in the gym because they're not sticking to those unspoken rules. That's another fun challenge to approach. And again, every time they change levels, supine, seated, standing, there are great opportunities for you to not only punish and fatigue them, but to take great positions and great finishing positions.